When you drive through America, sometimes the landscape can change dramatically and quickly. So it was today, when a few hours driving took us from our infamous motel in a cheerful flat town in California to a snowy alpine lake surrounded by mountains and fir trees to a parched desert festooned with the Mojave's famous Joshua trees. It's day 5 and the road trip is getting weird. This morning was the first look at the Wigwam Motel in the daylight for Masayo and I. In addition to the several concrete faux wigwam structures arranged around a semicircle, there are nods to the mythical American road trip of legend. Originally, there were 7 wigwam motels when the chain was established in the 1930s, stretching from Kentucky to here in California. 3 still operate, and all 3 are on the National Register of Historic Places. Much darker things were afoot in San Bernardino this morning, but we wouldn't find out about them until the evening. The Wigwam Motel is sort of on the border between the cities of San Bernardino and Rialto. Rialto is a very pleasant town and is the home of some interesting people and companies. J.J. Fad, who recorded the 1988 hit Supersonic, were from Rialto. Jeff Conine, the Florida Marlins star, went to high school here. And Rodney King, whose beating led to the 1991 LA riots, drowned in his swimming pool in Rialto in 2012. Pyro Spectaculars, one of the world's largest fireworks companies, is based here. Of course, we decided against driving along I-10, which leads directly to Joshua Tree National Park, in favor of highways that follow a much longer and slower and out-of-the-way route through the San Bernardino Mountains. I usually ignore signs about slow traffic since they don't apply to me, but on this day, they did. I pulled out to let other cars go by. What's the hurry? Highway 330 ends in a village called Running Springs, which was first inhabited by a Native American tribe who called themselves Yuhaviatum, which means people of the pines. And there were pines. In fact, a scene in Gone with the Wind, where Scarlett gets attacked in her buggy, was filmed in this area because the pine trees looked like Georgia. We started seeing big patches of white in the hills around us and joked that it was snow, but then it stopped being a joke when we realized that it really was snow. Big Bear Lake was a genuine surprise, a cool deep blue body of water surrounded by dense green trees and hills, with dramatic snowy mountains in the distance. If you want vindication for the decision to skip interstates on this trip, well, here it is. The town of Fawnskin is about halfway along the drive. It's an artist colony and a favorite place for writers. Fawnskin also has an unusual mayoral election system. Votes are cast by giving your chosen candidate 25 cents. Whoever gets the most quarters wins. By buying its politicians so openly, the town claims to have the only honest election in the U.S. Heart-stopping views to an endless sun-baked valley far below suddenly appear. You feel like you're driving around the rim of the world, and in a way, you really are. And the road was grim but determined, like all good desert roads. And it was here on Camp Rock Road that we saw our first actual Joshua tree. Actually, I need to mention something about the travel gods here. Today, as we were driving down Old Woman Springs Road, we were listening to an album by a band called Cracker. We got to the town of Yucca Valley and turned left onto Highway 62. And just as we did, lead singer David Lowery sang the line, "Come ride with me down 62." I gotta say, it was like the travel gods were smiling down upon us. Not totally, though. But a leaflet explained that we could use land from the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, a few miles away for free camping. Admission to Joshua Tree National Park is $25, but only during the gate's opening hours. Arrive afterwards and you get in free. And whenever you enter, you're now in the mesmerizing alternate universe that is one of America's most famous parks. If you're of a certain age and/or a certain disposition, when you hear the phrase Joshua Tree, you probably think of U2's 1987 album by that name, but we opted instead for no music at all. The destination was Keys View, the highest elevation in the park at just over 5,000 feet. Joshua Tree National Park lies where two deserts meet. The line dividing the Mojave and the Colorado deserts winds through the park. As for the trees, well, the official park brochure hardly even mentions them. Instead, it makes the case that the area is remarkable for several other species of plants and animals, as well as features of great geological interest, like the mounds of boulders pushed up by magma and split by water. Collectively, all that is the reason that Joshua Tree National Monument was established in 1936 by President Franklin Roosevelt, and why it was elevated to national park status in 1994. No one is sure why they're called Joshua trees. The usual story is that Mormons passing through in the mid-1800s thought they looked like Joshua from the Bible, raising his arms. But no records exist of the trees being called that until afterwards, and many feel that a better biblical story would have been when Moses kept his arms raised, with help, to divinely help his side win a battle. At any rate, it isn't even really a tree, but a tree-like yucca plant. For our purposes, let's just agree that they are awesome and do indeed look like they're holding their arms up in the air, here in God's country, in some sort of comical yet mystical eternal desert ceremony. There were a few others there when we arrived. Other people, I mean. We hoped there were no killer bees. Keys View is something else. You can even see the northern tip of the Salton Sea miles away, which will actually be on tomorrow's itinerary. And while we were up there, I overheard a girl say, "Oh, Joshua Tree, we listened to that album over and over on the way here." Half of the people up at Keys View started ambling down the hill to the parking lot, but the rest of us turned our heads around to the east. There, in the darkening dusk, a full moon was rising. Two amazing celestial performances, opposite but closely connected, back to back. I couldn't believe our timing. We headed out of the park to go find a camping spot in the BLM land a few miles outside the park. It was pitch black except the weeds in the headlights. There were no signs anywhere for anything. Where the streets have no name, indeed. Finally, down a side path, I could make out another vehicle in the moonlight and figured we must be near the camping area. So I pulled over and started to get the tent out of the trunk. It would be my first time ever setting it up. But suddenly a bright light from the direction of the other car shone in my face, and a voice called out in the darkness. A kind of whiny California voice. I think it might have been this guy.
What are you doing here?
The voice complained that we were too close and said, testily, that we can go anywhere we wanted, quote, between here and the mountain. Wherever that was, I couldn't see any mountain. I couldn't see anything. At one point, I noticed out of the corner of my eye a big flash in the sky to the south. I figured it was fireworks over the national park. I mean, Rialto is famous for fireworks, right? We had our camping food, Campbell's soup and Triscuits, now with a Newcastle for me, in the room. At least whoever decorated this room was sympathetic to our campsite plans falling through. On TV were two interesting local news stories. The first was about a shooting at a school in San Bernardino that morning. While we'd sat in our room at 10:30 a.m. at the Wigwam Motel, having donuts and coffee from the lobby, a man had entered a school about 5 miles away and killed his wife, who was a teacher there, a student, and then himself. We actually happened to be within a couple of miles of the school 3 hours later on our way out of town, but didn't see any commotion. The other news story was about another kind of shooting, a shooting star. That flash of light I'd seen over Joshua Tree National Park, it turns out, was a huge meteor burning up in the atmosphere, streaking across the sky and big enough to be seen all over Southern California and as far as New Mexico, and big enough to make the evening news here. If it had occurred just 20 seconds later, I'd have caught it on the dash cam, but you'll just have to take my word for it. It was cool, man. Tomorrow we return to Joshua Tree to see the western part of the park, in the daylight, and I find out whether type 1 diabetes counts as a disability for a lifetime park pass. We end up in Yuma, Arizona, but on the way pass through more odd landscapes in Southern California that are, if anything, even more varied than what we saw today.